Hi guys, welcome back, and today we're starting on book 2, and it's gonna be chapter 1 and 2. Alright, so chapter 1. In the spring of 1917, when Dr. Richard Diver first arrived in Zurich, he was 26 years old, a fine age for a man indeed, the very acme of bachelorhood. Even in wartime days, it was a fine age for Dick, who was already too valuable, too much of a capital investment to be shot off in a gun. Years later, it seemed to him that even in this sanctuary he did not escape lightly, but about that he never fully made up his mind. In 1917, he laughed at the idea, saying apologetically that the war didn't touch him at all. Instructions from his local board were that he was to complete his studies in Zurich and take a degree as he had planned. Switzerland was an island, washed on one side by the waves of thunder around Gorizia, and on another by the cataracts along the Somme and the Eist. For once, there seemed more intriguing strangers than sick ones in the cantons. But that had to be guessed at. The men who whispered in the little cafes of Burns and Geneva were as likely to be diamond salesmen or commercial travelers. However, no one had missed the long trains of blinded or one-legged man, or dying trunks that crossed each other between the bright lakes of Constance and Neuchâtel. In the beer halls and shop windows were bright posters presenting the Swiss defending their frontiers in 1914. With inspiring ferocity, young men and old men glared upon the mountains at phantom French and Germans. The purpose was to assure the Swiss heart that it had shared the contagious glory of those days. As the massacre continued, the posters withered away, and no country was more surprised than its sister republic when the United States bungled its way into the war. Dr. Diver had seen around the edges of the war by that time. He was an Oxford Rhodes Scholar from Connecticut in 1914. He returned home for a final year at Johns Hopkins and took his degree. In 1916, he managed to get to Vienna under the impression that, if he did not make haste, the great Froude would eventually succumb to an aeroplane bomb. Even then, Vienna was old with death, but Dick managed to get enough coal and oil to sit in his room and the Damen-Stiftstrasse and write the pamphlets that he destroyed later, but that, rewritten, were the backbone of the book he published in Zurich in 1920. Most of us have a favorite, a heroic period in our lives, and that was Dick Diver's. For one thing, he had no idea that he was charming, that the affection he gave and inspired was anything unusual among healthy people. In his last year at New Haven, someone referred to him as Lucky Dick. The name lingered in his head. "Lucky Dick, you big stiff," he would whisper to himself, walking around the last sticks of flame in his room. "You hid it, my boy. Nobody knew it was there before you came along." At the beginning of 1917, when it was becoming difficult to find coal, Dick burned for fuel almost 100 textbooks that had accumulated. But only as he laid each one in the fire, with an assurance chuckling inside him that he was himself a digest of what was within the book, that he could brief it 5 years from now, if it deserved to be briefed. This went on at any odd hour, if necessary, with a floor rug over his shoulders, with the fine quiet of the scholar which is nearest of all things to heavenly peace, but which, as will presently be told, had to end. For its temporary continuance, he thanked his body that had done the flying rings at New Haven, and now swam in the winter Duna Bay. With Elkins, second secretary at the embassy, he shared an apartment, and there were 2 nice girl visitors, which was that and not too much of it, nor too much of the embassy either. His contact with Ed Elkins aroused in him a first faint doubt as to the quality of his mental processes. He could not feel that they were profoundly different from the thinking of Elkins. Elkins, who he would name "you all the quarterbacks in New Haven for 30 years. And Lucky Dick can't be one of these clever men. He must be less intact, even faintly destroyed. If life won't do it for him, it's not a substitute to get a disease or a broken heart or an inferiority complex. It'd be nice to build out some broken side till it was better than the original structure. He mocked at his reasoning, calling it specious and American. His criteria of uncerebral phrase-making was that it was American. He knew, though, that this price of his intactness was in completeness. The best I could wish you, my child, so said the fairy Blackstick in Thackeray's The Rose in the Ring, is a little misfortune. In some moods, he griped at his own reasoning. Could I help it that Pete Livingstone sat in the locker room tap day when everybody looked all over hell for him? And I got an election when otherwise I wouldn't have gotten Elihu, knowing so few men. He was good and I was right, and I ought to have sat in the locker room instead. Maybe I would if I thought I had a chance at an election. But Mercer kept coming to my room all those weeks. I guess I knew I had a chance all right. But it would have served me right if I'd swallowed my pin in the shower and set up a conflict. I'm gonna move that. After the lectures at the university, he used to argue this point with a young Romanian intellectual who reassured him. There's no evidence that both ever had a conflict in the modern sense, or a man like Jung, for instance. You're not a romantic philosopher, you're a scientist. Memory, force, character, especially good sense. That's going to be your trouble, judgment about yourself. Once I knew a man who worked 2 years on the brain of an armadillo with an idea that he would sooner or later know more about the brain of an armadillo than anyone. I kept arguing with him that he was not really pushing out the extension of the human range. It was too arbitrary. And sure enough, when he sent his work to the medical journal, they refused it. They had just accepted a thesis by another man on the same subject. Dick got up to Zurich on less Achilles' heels than would be required to equip a centipede, but with plenty the illusion of eternal strength and health, and of the essential goodness of people, illusions of a nation, the lives of generations of frontier mothers who had too crooned falsely, and there was no wolves outside the cabin door. After he took his degree, he received his orders to join a neurological unit forming in Bar-sur-Aube. In France, to his disgust, the work was executive rather than practical. In compensation, he found time to complete the short textbook and assemble the material for his next venture. He returned to Zurich in the spring of 1919, discharged. The foregoing has the ring of a biography without the satisfaction of knowing that the hero, like Grant, lolling in his general store in Galena, is ready to be called to an intricate destiny. Moreover, it is confusing to come across a youthful photograph of someone known in a rounded maturity and gaze with a shock upon a fiery, wiry, eagle-eyed stranger. Best to be reassuring. Dick Divers' moment now began. Chapter 2. It was a damp April day with a long diagonal clouds over the Alpshorn and water in the low places. Zurich is not unlike an American city. Missing something ever since his arrival 2 days before, Dick perceived that it was the sense he had had in finite French lanes that there was nothing more. In Zurich, there was a lot besides Zurich. The roofs up led the eyes to tinkling cow pastures, which in turn modified hilltops further up. So life was a perpendicular starting off to a postcard heaven. The alpine lands, home to the toy and the funicular, the merry-go-round and the thin chime, were not a being here, as in France with French vines growing over one's feet on the ground. In Salzburg, once Dick had felt the superimposed quality of a bought-and-borrowed century of music. Once in the laboratories of the university in Zurich, delicately poking at the cervical of her brain, he had felt like a toy maker rather than like the tornado who had hurried through the old red buildings of Hopkins 2 years before, unstayed by the irony of the gigantic Christ in the entrance hall. Yet he had decided to remain another 2 years in Zurich, for he did not underestimate the value of toy-making, an infinite precision of infinite patience. Today he went out to see Franz Gregorius at Dahlemer's clinic in the Zuricher See. Franz, resident pathologist at the clinic, a Vaudeus by birth, a few years older than Dick, met him at the tram stop. He had a dark and magnificent aspect of Cagliostro about him. Contrasted with holy eyes, he was the third of the Gregovices. His grandfather had instructed Crapelaine when psychiatry was just emerging from the darkness of all time. In personality, he was proud, fiery, and sheep-like. He fancied himself as a hypnotist. If the original genius of the family had grown a little tired, Franz would without a doubt become a fine clinician. On the way to the clinic, he said, "Tell me of your experiences in the war. Are you changed like the rest? You have the same stupid and unaging American face, except I know you're not stupid, Dick." "I didn't see any of the war. You must have gathered that from my letters, Franz." "That doesn't matter. We have some shell shocks who merely heard an air raid from a distance. We have a few who merely read newspapers." "It sounds like nonsense to me." "Maybe it is, Dick, but we're a rich person's clinic. We don't use the word nonsense. Frankly, did you come down to see me or see that girl?" They looked sideways at each other. Franz smiled enigmatically. "Naturally, I saw the first letters," he said in his official basso. "When the change began, delicacy prevented me from opening any more. Really, it had become your case." "Then she's well?" Dick demanded. "Perfectly well. I have charge of her, in fact. I have charge of the majority of the English and American patients. They call me Dr. Gregory." "Let me explain about that girl," Dick said. "I only saw her one time, that's a fact, when I came out to say goodbye to you just before I went over to France. It was the first time I put on my uniform and I felt very bogus in it. Went around saluting private soldiers and all that." "Why didn't you wear it today?" "Hey, I've been discharged 3 weeks. Here's the way I happened to see that girl. When I left you, I walked down before that building of yours on the lake to get my bicycle. Toward the Cedars? A wonderful night, you know. Moon over that mountain. The Krenzik. I caught up with a nurse and a young girl. I didn't think the girl was a patient. I asked the nurse about her tram times and we walked along. The girl was about the prettiest thing I ever saw. She still is. She'd never seen an American uniform, and we talked, and I didn't think anything about it." He broke off, recognizing a familiar perspective, and then resumed, "Except, Franz, I'm not as hard-boiled as you are yet. When I see a beautiful shell like that, I can't help feeling regret about what's inside it." That was absolutely all till the letters began to come. "It was the best thing that could have happened to her," said Franz dramatically, "a transference of the most fortuitous kind. That's why I came down to meet you on a very busy day. I want you to come into my office and talk a long time before you see her. In fact, I sent her into Zurich to do errands." His voice was tense with enthusiasm. "In fact, I sent her without a nurse, with a less stable patient. I'm intensely proud of this case, which I handled, with your accidental assistance." The car had followed the shore of the Zurich Sea into a fertile region of pasture farms and low hills, steepled with chateaux. The sun swam out into the blue sea of sky, and suddenly it was the Swiss valley at its best. Pleasant sounds and murmurs, and a good fresh smell of health and cheer. Professor Dahmer's plant consisted of 3 old buildings and a pair of new ones, between a slight eminence and the shore of the lake. At its founding 10 years before, it had been the first modern clinic for mental illness. At a casual glance, no layman would recognize it as a refuge for the broken, the incomplete, the menacing of this world, though 2 buildings were surrounded with vine-softened walls of a deceptive height. Some men raked straw in the sunshine here and there. As they rode into the grounds, the car passed the white flag of a nurse waving beside a patient on a path. After conducting Dick to his office, Franz excused himself for half an hour. Left alone, Dick wandered about the room and tried to reconstruct Franz from the litter of his desk, from his books and the books of and by his father and grandfather, from the Swiss piety of a huge claret-colored photo of the former on the wall. There was smoke in the room. Pushing open a French window, Dick let in a cone of sunshine. Suddenly, his thoughts swung out to the patient, the girl. He had received about 50 letters from her, written over a period of 8 months. The first one was apologetic, explaining that she had heard from America how girls wrote to soldiers whom they did not know. She had obtained the name and address from Dr. Gregory, and she hoped he would not mind if sometimes sent word to wish him well, etc., etc. So far, it was easy to recognize the tone. From Daddy Longlegs and Molly Make-Believe, sprightly and sentimental exploratory collections enjoying a vogue in the States. But there the resemblance ended. The letters were divided into two classes, of which the first class, up to about the time of the armistice, was of a marked pathological turn, and of which the second class, running from thence up to the present, was entirely normal and displayed a richly maturing nature. For these latter letters Dick had come to wait eagerly in the last dull month of Ball. Yet even from the first letters he had pierced together more than Franz would have guessed of the story. Mon Capitaine, I thought when I saw you in your uniform you were so handsome. Then I thought je m'aime speech French too and German. You thought I was pretty too, but I've had that before in a long time I've stood it. If you come here again with that attitude base and criminal, and not even faintly that what I had been taught to associate with the role of gentleman, then heaven help you. Heaven help you. Oh my gosh, I don't know why I read that so wrong. However, you seem quieter than the others, all soft like a big cat. I have only gotten to like boys who are rather sissies. Are you a sissy? There were some somewhere. Excuse all this. It is the third letter I've written you, and I will send immediately or will never send. I've thought a lot about moonlight, too. And there are many witnesses. I could find it if I could only be out of here. Then said you were a doctor, but so long you are a cat and it is different. My head aches so excuse this walking there like an ordinary with a white cat will explain, I think. I could speak 3 languages, 4 with English, and I'm sure I could be useful interpreting if you arrange such things in French. I'm sure I could control everything with the belts and bounds around everybody like it was Wednesday. It is now Saturday and you are far away, perhaps killed. Come back to me some day, for I will be here always on this green hill, unless they will let me write my father, whom I love dearly. Excuse this, I'm not myself today. I will write when I feel better. Cheerio, Nicole Warren. The next letter read, Captain Diver, I know introspection is not good for a highly nervous state like mine, but I would like you to know where I stand. Last year, or whenever it was in Chicago, when I got so I couldn't speak to servants or walk in the street, I kept waiting for someone to tell me. It was the duty of someone who understood. The blind must be led. Only no one would tell me everything. They would just tell me half, and I was already too muddled to put 2 and 2 together. One man was nice. He was a French officer, and he understood. He gave me a flower and said it was plus petite et moins entendu. We were friends. Then he took it away. I grew sicker, and there was no one to explain to me. They had a song about Joan of Arc that they used to sing to me, but that was just mean. It would just make me cry, for there was nothing the matter with my head then. They kept making references to sports, too, but I didn't care about that. So there was the day I went walking on Michigan Boulevard on and on for miles, and finally they followed me into an automobile, but I wouldn't get in. Finally, they pulled me in, and there were nurses. After that time, I began to realize it all because I could feel what was happening in others. So you see how I stand. And what good can it be for me to stay here with the doctors harping constantly in the things I was here to get over? So today I have written my father to come and take me away. I'm glad you are so interested in examining people and sending them back. It must be so much fun. And again, from another letter. You might pass up on your next examination and write me a letter. They just sent me some photograph records in case I should forget my lesson, and I broke them all so the nurses won't speak to me. They were in English so that the nurses would not understand. One doctor in Chicago said I was bluffing, but what he really meant was that I was a twin 6 and he had never seen one before. But I was very busy being mad then, so I didn't care what he said. When I am very busy being mad, I don't usually care what they say. Where's my phone sliding? Not if I were a million girls. You told me that night you teach me to play. Well, I think love is all there is or should be. Anyhow, I am glad you are interested and examinations keep you busy. To Devu, Nicole Warren. There were other letters among whose helpless caesars lurked darker rhythms. Dear Captain Dipper, I write to you because there was no one else to whom I can turn to, and it seems to me if this farcical situation is apparent to one as sick as me, it should be apparent to you. The mental trouble is all over, and beside that, I'm completely broken and humiliated. If that was what they wanted. My family have shamefully neglected me. There's no use asking them for help or pity. I have had enough, and it is simply ruining my health and wasting my time pretending that what is the matter with my head is curable. Here I am in what appears to be a semi-insane asylum, all because nobody saw fit to tell me the truth about anything. Hold on, I need to readjust this. If I had only known what was going on like I know now, I could have stood it, I guess, for I am pretty strong. But who should have, did not see fit to enlighten me. And now, when I know I have paid such a price for knowing, they sit there in their dogs' lives and say I should believe what I did believe. Especially one does, but I know now. I am lonesome all the time, far away from friends and family across the Atlantic. I roam all over the place in half days. If you could get me a position as interpreter, I know French and German like a native, fair Italian and a little Spanish, or in the Red Cross ambulance, or as a trained nurse, though I would have to train you, would prove a great blessing. And again, another letter. Since you will not accept my explanation of what is the matter, you could at least explain to me what you think, because you have a kind cat's face, and not that funny look that seems to be so fashionable here. Dr. Gregory gave me a snapshot of you, not as handsome as you are in your uniform, but younger looking. Mon Capitaine. It was fine to have your postcard. I am so glad you take such interest in disqualifying nurses. Oh, I understood your note very well indeed. Only I thought from the moment I met you that you were different. Dear Capitaine, I think today and another tomorrow. That is really all that's the matter with me, except a crazy defiance and lack of proportion. I would gladly welcome the alienists you might suggest. Here they lie in their bathtubs and sing "Play in Your Backyard" as if they had my backyard to play in, or hope which I can find by looking either backward or forward. They tried it again in the candy store again, and I almost hit the man with the weight, but they helped me. I'm not going to write you any more. I'm too unstable. And then a month with no letters. And then suddenly the change. I am slowly coming back to life. Today the flowers in the clouds. The war is over, and I scarcely knew there was a war. How kind you have been. You must be very wise behind your face like a white cat, except you don't look like that in the picture Dr. Gregory gave me. Today I went to Zurich. How strange a feeling to see a city again. Today I went to Bern. It looks so nice with the clocks. Today we climbed high enough to find Asphodel and Edelweiss. After that the letters were fewer, but he answered them all. There was one. I wish someone were in love with me like boys were ages ago before I was sick. I suppose it will be years, though, before I can think of anything like that. But when Dick's answer was delayed for any reason, there was a fluttering burst of worry, like a worry of a lover. Perhaps I have bored you, and afraid I have presumed, and I keep thinking at night you have been sick. In actuality, Dick was sick with the flu. When he recovered, all except the formal part of his correspondence was sacrificed to the consequent fatigue, and shortly afterward the memory of her became overlaid by the vivid presence of a Wisconsin telephone girl at headquarters in Bar Suab. She was red-lipped like a poster and known obscenely in the messes as the switchboard. Franz came back into the office feeling self-important. Dick thought he would probably be a fine clinician, for the sonorous and staccato cadences by which he disciplined nurses or patient came not from his nervous system, but from a tremendous and harmless vanity. His true emotions were more ordered and kept to himself. Now about the girl, Dick, he said. Of course I want to find out about you and tell you about myself, but first about the girl because I have been waiting to tell you about it so long. He searched for and found a sheaf of papers in a filing cabinet, but after shuffling through them, he found they were in his way and put them on his desk. Instead, he told Dick the story. Alright guys, so that's the end of chapter 2. So, it's kind of tea. Basically, it's back in time to when Dick was still a doctor, and he met Nicole because she was a patient at the hospital. So that's tea. Anyway. Oh, and yeah, also Nicole has like a mental illness, which we're going to learn a little more about. But yeah. Anyway, see you next time for the next chapters. Bye. Mwah.